Good evening and welcome back to the very last session of A Window into Worlds, a world building workshop. We've been through the last 3 weeks going over tons of information, and I have probably overwhelmed some people, but I think overall we've given enough information that it won't be terrifying experience when people actually start to do this. If you've not been with us throughout this, I've got it all on YouTube, and you can find it on the RPHQ YouTube as a playlist or on Archmage Celestia's playlist. So you can find it either of those places, and you can always contact me. I'll have my email at the end if you would like that. We started out this workshop beginning with the creation of worlds as a general topic, then moving on to the universe, the world, city building, and now we're talking about all of the details, which are numerous. Every city has a lot of working parts, and we've already talked about that. So now we have all of our information that we need, and we can put it together. So you're probably going to remember that time at the end of the very first session where I told you not to do a bunch of info dumping and lore dumping and putting out a whole lot of information. And then I immediately told you that you should write all that information down and you're going to need it later. And you were probably thinking that entire time that this lady's crazy and she needs to make up her mind. But that's the really important thing. Like I said, you really need to write it down for your reference and for later use, because this is the part where it comes in handy. This is the part where all the information that we've given you and all the things you're putting together actually becomes real. So this is probably going to go over a little more than an hour, unless I talk fast. And I've got quite a bit planned out, because we've already discussed all of these things, but now we're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail. I've just got a slide or two developed for each topic. We are going to go through the world building process with history, so we're going to talk about making a timeline, the government and how the past rulers have made an impact, the months of the year, the days of the week, how time functions. We're going to talk about magic and technology and science, the other races in your world and the creatures that occupy it, which is also a part of science, really, and all the different cultural differences. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is the languages. It's probably the topic I get asked about the most, and it's the one that I have the least amount of information on, but we're going to discuss it anyway. So first we're going to talk about history, and Mal has already told me that I'm talking too fast, so I'll slow down. When you're going to make your world, you have to make sure that it makes some sense. So I recommend the first thing you do is make a timeline. It's something that gives you a guide on how things progress, not just for your story, but the world up to your story's beginning. There are a lot of different ones that you can find online. This one, I've got a link down at the bottom, and it's where I made mine. And the great thing about this one is you can save the file on your computer and go back to this website and upload that file again. So you always have it to access, and then when you download it as download a final copy of it, you get this, and you also get a little outline as well on the second page. So even though I have here that the first stage is the era of the Titans, there's a lot more details in that little square, and you can add pictures to these as well so that you can have a reference as to what the event is. Of course, you have a set amount of room so you have to give yourself some leeway. There's a lot more room than this, but I cut it off because otherwise that's spoilers for the story. So I chopped all that off. But this gives you some room to wiggle. It gives you a plot and gives you a history. So it's a great tool, and I think it's probably one of the first things that you should consider doing with your stories. Now this is something, and I actually just talked to my writing group about this last night. You really don't need to do this. It looks absolutely insane. Do my readers need to know who the Sultan was in the year 618? No, not really. Would they care if they did? No, probably not. This is more for my reference. I had an incident with my story where I mentioned that a character's grandfather was at a certain battle. But then when I started doing all the math, I realized, that makes his grandfather like over 1,000 years old. So it just didn't make sense from a historical perspective. And because I referenced so many historical events, I found that this was probably the best thing that I could do. And it has helped immensely. And because of the way that my story is set up, I also had other references on this as well. I have several copies of it that I have made notes on. So it's an excellent way to organize yourself, keep track of who's in charge and how long, and their family history. So it's not something that I'm encouraging you necessarily to do, because it literally took me like a month and a lot of math, and it was frustrating. But now that it's done, I have this as a guide, and it has been infinitely useful. And as you can see, all those little red squiggles, Word does not recognize these names. So speaking of time, now we have to decide on a system of time, which might just be a normal timeline for you, but it might be a lot different. Not just time as in hours in the day and days of the week, but your whole year might be a lot different. Maybe you have a world where summer's a lot longer, or maybe there's just more time in the day, so they measure things a little bit differently. In my world, there's 9 days in a week, because time just flows a little differently. There's, I think, 10 months, and things just have a different pattern because of the way that the people have organized it. And this is when you can get really playful and make a lot of different holidays and memorial days and religious festivals. And you can plan them, and maybe your religious festival lasts for several days, and it helps you block off time. Having special events really helps add another level of flavor to your world, because it's things that the residents there are going to take notice of, and they're going to adjust their schedule to fit that. So obviously you're probably not going to have a National Hug a Goat Day, but if you do, you get extra bonus points in my book. So you have to kind of think of these things and decide what you're going to call the days of the week if they're going to be different, because in a world that is set up on a different timeline, you're probably going to have more days, or you might have less days. The power of knowledge. When I say knowledge in this case, we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about tangible knowledge, information that we can hold, that we have examples of, and we can explain it. So that's science, and that's technology, and things that we use to advance our society. And then we have our abstract knowledge, and that's where faith comes into play, that's where magic comes in, and that's when we actually see everything that we can utilize in the world in a different way. So tangible, we have our science and our technology. These are very broad ideas that cover a range of life. This can be your medical treatment. This can be your source of power, fuel, even everyday items Uh, for example, if you're writing a fantasy, they didn't really actually use torches the way that they're always depicted as being used in movies. And really, they didn't have the oil in some early on to even power those. So you might have oil that they didn't have before, and you just make process. A lot of people prefer science over faith because it's something that's tangible. They have answers to questions that we didn't know the answers to. They provide explanations in ways that make more sense. But of course, we need faith as well, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Technology that just makes our lives a little bit easier. And obviously, sitting here on 2 computers with a PowerPoint going, technology has made a big change for us. And of course, the two work together. So faith and magic, we can't always hold them. You might be able to hold a fireball, but it has to manifest from some invisible power usually. It depends on your magic system, but it's not something that you create through chemistry by working a lot of different elements and putting them together in a lab. It's something that is conjured. It's really exciting to use, and it's really easy to say, oh, my character can put an ice block around herself. Well, where does that ice block come from? You have to have this sort of idea. Some people just glaze over it and just explain, it's magic. I don't need to explain where it is, or where it comes from, and who can use it, but you should. It gives a whole other meaning to how it is used in your world. And of course, faith. I can't even count the amount of times that I have said that faith and religion is incredibly important in world building. But it's something I have to say over and over again because that is what a lot of people base everything on. It's who created them and why they're here, and they bring in temples, and that's the first thing they establish. They base their holidays off of it. That's why it's so important, and that's why I keep emphasizing it. So let's talk about the science and technology. This is something that you really kind of have to determine based on the world that you're creating. Obviously, a medieval fantasy is going to have very different science and technology than a sci-fi that takes place in the year, 8,000. So it's going to be a lot different. There's different branches of science that are really fun to write. And I've mentioned them earlier before, but astronomy is a big one. It's easy to write in sci-fi, but in fantasy and lower fiction as well, you can have a lot of different concepts and belief systems that people use, and think about how these things affect your world. Obviously, the moon affects the tide, and the sun affects the temperature of the earth and how things grow. So you want to consider how they affect your world as well. Botany has become one of my favorite subjects, and for Camp NaNoWriMo, which I have mentioned in the previous sessions as well, for April I decided to write a collection of lore books, and I wrote one that was nothing but botany. I did about 4,000 words of nothing but the botanical wonders of the world that I've been writing about. And I write about what the plant looks like. I write about its uses. Some of them can be used for healing or poisons or a natural defense if you have a briar patch. And some of them are actually just living things that can entangle a boar and just slowly digest it. So it's been something that I've really enjoyed writing and studying and learning about, and that's probably the most fun. Zoology is a second favorite of mine because obviously you're going to have animals that are populating your world. I guess You may not have those, but chances are you're going to have some kind of animal in your world, and it's probably going to be a little bit unique, and you might want to outline it and write about it and determine exactly how it functions. Do dire wolves hunt in packs? Do they hunt alone? Is there animal testing in your world? If it's a science fiction, there might be. Obviously, a lot of sci-fi movies and books rely on animals instigating some sort of dramatic turn in the story, so you have to think about those and how the science affects them. And of course, like I said earlier, there's a big difference in technology depending on the type of story you're writing. Technology in a high fantasy medieval setting is going to be very different than a sci-fi. We've already talked about that. But even between Victorian London and modern times, we have a huge change in our technology. Before we just had rotary phones, or we just had a courier service or telegraphs, and now we have cell phones that we can do everything from. And it's just a really big difference based on our time period. And of course, the genre that you're involved in is going to be a lot different. The machinery, the tools that they use, the communication devices. Don't be afraid to switch things up, but do research and establish a firm understanding of the concepts that you're going to be using, because that way it seems more believable and it's realistic. And now we're going to talk about the abstract things. I love magic. It's something that I love to see utilized in different ways. I like to see it combined in different settings where it wouldn't normally be found. And there's so many different ways you can go, and there's so many different schools you can participate with. So it's a really great way to give your world an extra kick. Again, faith and religion, I talk about this constantly, but it's just such an important pillar. It's what so many things are based upon. And pretty much any world that you get involved in as a role player is going to have some kind of faith system. They're going to have something. If you're playing in the Elder Scrolls, you're going to have the Divines, or you're going to have the Three. And you're going to have all these different gods and goddesses and deities that play a major part. And even the different cultures will recognize similar ones. They'll just call them by different names a lot of times. So you don't have to have this, but I highly recommend having something, even if it's just an idea of where the people of the world came from. But it gives people hope, it gives them a purpose, and it gives them a sanctuary when the world is in danger. It also causes conflict. But from that's how you get people playing roles like paladins and clerics, and you get these people who are involved with the church, and you have these priests that worship, but they also play an important role outside. These are the people who study to be healers and midwives, and they're the ones that carry on a legacy well after the rest of the world has forgotten. It helps you establish who made the world. You can think about, is there an afterlife? Is there only one heaven, or is there something else? Is there something beyond that is eternal torture? Almost every culture has some kind of concept, and it's almost always divided up into light and dark. If you have light, you're going to have shadow, because the light casts that shadow by hitting something. And there's always this struggle of good and evil. In almost every culture, they have it. It's just a balance. So you have your people who are going to be fighting for the light, or for at least what they think is a good cause. These are the lawful people, or they might be chaotic. They are the paladins and the zealots who absolutely abhor everything evil. If they have to burn down a town to kill a demon, they're going to do it, even though that means everybody in the town is going to lose their home. These are just the different extremes that people go to, even though they feel like what they're doing is good. And of course, contrary to that, we have dark magic, which can also be faith-based, but it's a different kind of faith, if at all. These are the people that are typically labeled as antagonists, that they are the people who maybe they think they're a hero, they think that their darkness is more important, that it can be used. It's also the people who delve into this thinking that they can control it, and then they fail. But there are a lot of games out there that use dark magic and blood magic that it's still the hero, the protagonist, that is using it. And it's just a matter of what they believe and how you present that magic. So now that you're going to actually have some magic in your world, if you are, you have to think about what kinds are going to exist. You're going to think about the different people who can use those and where the power comes from. Is it mana that they're using to use these abilities? Is it something else? Who has access to it? Can everybody be a mage? Is there only a select group of people who can be sorcerers? Are they accepted as a people? It's kind of hard to trust someone who can conjure something out of thin air. So you have to determine, are they a trusted individual or are they evil? And that can be a really fine line. Also ranks and titles. You can find a lot of examples of those. You might have an archmage. You might have acolytes. It just depends on the system you want to use. But having that adds an extra little system of organization just to this specific topic. So talking about the types of magic, you can pick up pretty much any fantasy tabletop game. Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, they all have these different schools of magic. It's even in a lot of games. You'll see people spec for restoration in WoW, and they're obviously healers. But there's all these other classes that you can get into. Transmutation, alteration, illusion, and no matter what you call them, they're all going to have similar things. So someone who's an elemental mage and using fire and earth and water and lightning might be similar to nature magic, like a shaman or a druid who utilizes parts of nature as well. So there might be some overlapping. Or if you just want to keep it vague, just call it white magic, black magic, blood magic. Of course, there's things like necromancy to consider. So you can be kind of vague with it if you don't want to get specific, but I love the idea of having very specific schools of magic and the powers that they use. So now that we have this world that's really growing, that's really populated, we want to have a different population that exists in it. If you only have humans in your world, that's fine. There's lots of different stories that never introduce fictional races, and they're great. But it can be so much more exciting if you have this rainbow of skin tones throughout your world and all of these different settings that they're going to be living in. So whether it's a science fiction or whether it's a fantasy, you have so much room to add these different and unique races. And you have no limits on creating them as long as it's a body that they can actually walk around in, and they have this reasonable physical shell, then you don't have a lot of limits. You can make them from another planet, you can make them from within the Earth's core. Elves are obviously a go-to for fantasy, but there's so many different choices, and there's so many different options that you have to expand on. When we think about race, especially from a scientific point of view, a lot of times we think about ancestry and skin tone, their size, but it's more than that when you have fantasy and fiction to work with, because you can mold just about anybody. I really like the Sylvari Guild Wars. If you've ever played it, they're a very unique race. They get a lot of grief because of the type of mindset that they have, but they're absolutely beautiful because they're literally made out of plants. And it's just one of those races that sticks out in my mind. Obviously there's lots of alien races in games like Star Wars that are based upon the movies, and there's really so much that people can work with. More than just races that are intelligent, that are living in cities or maybe in a forest, town, or ruins. You've got other races that still could really use some attention. Ogres, trolls, ettins, dryads. They are intelligent a lot of times, or sometimes they're completely mindless. It depends on how you want to portray them in your story. And it's a really great idea to make a bestiary about those. That was another one of the lore books I did in April, was just writing about the ogres and the trolls in my book series, because they're a little bit different than they are in like Dungeons and Dragons and in Norse mythology and the different origins of them. So you want to address how they function, their society, their biology, what makes them up, what they eat. The ogres in my books actually will normally kill the animals that they're hunting, and then they'll leave them there for a little bit and see if it draws out more animals. And if it does, if the bait is successful, then they'll kill those animals too, and then they have double the meals. And then they just cut them up right there and put them in pouches and save them for later. So it depends on how you want to present them to the reader and how you want them to interact with your characters. I think we can all agree that cultural differences can be a wonderful thing, and they can also cause a lot of conflict depending on how open-minded everybody is. But if you have a lot of cultural differences in your world and in the characters that occupy it, then you can have all these different flavors to the individual characters, and it helps teach other characters as well about those, and it shows the differences between them. The first thing that we notice about people is their appearance. We look at how they're dressed, we look at what they're wearing, we notice if they have any visible tattoos or piercings. We look at someone and can almost immediately tell that they might be from a different culture. So even though you know the guy on the left, if you don't know that he's the Crown Prince of Dubai, you can tell by the way he's dressed and how well kept he is that he is someone that is probably in a higher position, just because he's dressed in gold trim and he looks like a person that has some power. On the other hand, when you look at the jacket on the right hand side, it's not just a normal winter coat. You can look at it and see that it's probably some kind of military uniform. Even though it is dressed up a little bit, you can tell that it's not something that someone just wears on a normal day, though I totally would if I had it. So we judge people by what they're wearing and how they look because it shows us their social class, their position, their job. It tells us a lot about them just by the way they appear. And then of course we have different cultural customs. A lot of times things that people do is almost ritualistic and they don't even think about it. You're not going to go up to the Queen of England and high-five her on an average day, especially if it's your first time meeting her. But you're probably going to greet her in a very specific way. There's probably going to be people around you telling you, okay, when you go up there, this is what you have to do. Because it's really important. You want to make an impression, and you want to make sure that you do it correctly, because you don't want to look like a fool. A lot of cultures have very specific norms and behaviors that they do, and they just do it mechanically because it's a part of their culture, but they have to explain it to other people. When you enter a home in Japan, you take off your shoes, and most people know that. But if someone really doesn't know anything about Japan, they won't think about it. So someone will say, oh, you need to take off your shoes at the door. So it's just one of those little things that you might not think about. You might not think about gift giving as something that's a custom. Sometimes not bringing a gift to reciprocate can be the worst thing you can do, or maybe you aren't actually supposed to take that gift, but they're going to try and offer it to you anyway. So you really need to kind of learn the customs, and just like you do that when you travel, you want to include customs in your world. When I was in high school and college, I dated a Chinese guy, and the first time I went to stay with him, I met his grandmother. And the very first thing she said to me was, "Hello, I don't know English. Have you eaten yet today?" And I thought it was really strange. I had gotten in at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was really sleepy, and I thought, did she just ask if I ate something? And I was really confused, and then it was explained to me that food is really important, and that's just a hospitality thing with her. So her asking me if I had eaten was just normal behavior. And then she proceeded to offer me a bunch of foods that I was really not at all interested in eating, especially at 9 o'clock in the morning. So there's a very big cultural difference between me and her, and then between the characters in your world. If you have that as well, that can add that whole other layer of interactions. When it comes to food, you will have everyday diets. Maybe your town is very rural. They have a lot of domesticated animals, and they live off of those animals. They might raise pigs, so they're going to eat a lot of pork on a regular basis. But for holidays, they might have something special that they eat, and that can change the way that they utilize their routines. In my world, for example, all their festivals, they have a lot of skewers with meat and fruits because it's easy to get rid of a little wooden skewer and a lot easier to make it for large groups of people. So the big cities eat things like that. This is the topic that really is probably the most challenging. I've been asked about it several times, and I've never really had good answers. It's not something simple. It's not something that can be done in a short period of time. It's something that takes months, years of work to really create something useful. When we talk about communication, it's really difficult to do without language. You have that speaking language because that helps you record history, it helps you communicate. The spoken word is really powerful. Like I say here, a verbal spell might be a lot more powerful than a silent one that you don't say anything, that you just use your mind to utilize. Because words are powerful, and you can communicate without them, but there's just something about reading a language that's fabricated, that's fictional, that is just so much better. Like I said, constructing a language is not easy, and it shouldn't be. It's something that's going to be challenging. If you're doing a world building project, it might be the most challenging part if you're going to include it. Now, written versions of it, obviously on the last slide we had Quenya by Tolkien, and it's something that he worked on for years. He started it in school, and he just worked on it for a large portion of his life, and it grew, and he made offshoots from it. But you don't have to make this harder than it is. You don't have to kill yourself making this new language for your world. It's something that you can create a simple version of, because you have to think of what purpose it serves in your story. If you're not going to write a large portion in it, then you don't have to make something enormous. Just think about what you need and what reason you have for using it. The point of having a fictional language is not to just flaunt that you made a fictional language. It's not to show off that, oh hey, look, I made my own language and it's amazing. You don't want to do that. That's not the point. The whole reason to have the different language is to establish a mood or a tone or an emotion. If someone says something in a language that you don't know, but they present it in a context that it sounds ominous, it's going to strike fear into you, even though you don't know what it means. It can also be something that instills romance. If someone is looking deep into your eyes and they say something in a language you don't know, as long as the feeling is communicated, then you get a lot out of that. A lot of times someone can say something in French and it sounds romantic no matter what they're saying. They can be saying that you look like absolute crap, but because they said it in French, it might sound a little bit more romantic. It's all in the way that it's presented and to establish that sort of tone for the conversation. A lot of times you're going to want to use it to emphasize a particular word. And if two characters are communicating that both know the language, and one says it with enough intensity, if you write it well enough that it's delivered in a way that it emphasizes the purpose of them saying it in that language, not only does it keep it private between those two characters, but it emphasizes the meaning. It also just draws attention to the cultural differences. I have two characters in my book that speak the same language, but they get together at a point surrounded by hundreds of people, and no one else in that immediate area knows the language. So it establishes right away that these two people have a close relationship in some way, that they can communicate with each other, and their body movements and their body language tells the other people that their conversation is very important, and it establishes this foreshadowing. It's really hard to create a language, and it can be really stressful. And you see people that are always making these languages in different movies that are big box office hits, and you think, gosh, how do they possibly do that? Well, they do it because they can base it off of something else. They have a guide. We have so many different languages and they all stem from each other. Latin is the base language for so many other languages, and they're all related. The Romance languages are related. Languages that use Cyrillic as a writing system are all related. So you have these different languages that are very clearly different, but they are also somewhat related enough that they can be based off of each other, and people who speak two different languages that are related might even be able to understand a lot from each other. So here we have a comparison of fictional languages to real-life languages that they're related to. Tolkien has the language of Rohan, and a lot of the words and names from it are related to Old English words. Had to look up a lot of these to really understand them, and the Ewok language is based off of Kalmyk, which is less spoken language and more sound related. And then we have the Dark Elf language, which has roots, and a guide was used for Hungarian and Finnish and Estonian. So the guy who made that also made the language for Game of Thrones, the Dothraki language, I think. I don't watch Game of Thrones, but I know that's probably one that a lot of people would catch. So we're almost done. This is the last session, and we've been through 3 separate workshops, and we've learned a lot. We've talked about a lot, at least. Whether we've actually learned anything is a completely different matter. So now we're going to actually apply what we've talked about to a world. If you haven't seen any of my workshops before, we actually started with a large world setting, a universe, and got smaller, and we actually created a world map in which we had an example city. So we're going to take one of those cities and we're going to break it down. We had a lot of different ones to choose from. We had a desert city called Tasnim. We had a large capital city that we didn't bother to name because we left it for wiggle room. And then we had a couple of smaller agricultural towns, like Perrinwood. I think Perrinshire is what we ended up naming it. So I chose this one, though, because it existed in a wetlands environment, and it was on the coast, and I felt like it had a lot of room to grow, and we could specify a lot of different things about it. So this is our world of Sidhaven, and it is a rural town, but they don't have a lot of agriculture. That's not their focus. It's a resource extraction and trade town. It's along the coast. It's got a port with several docks for trades to come in from Tasnim, which is the desert nation, and they have a good trade relationship with them. And they also have land traders that come in from New Mellingham, which is what Mal in the chat named the capital city, because I didn't bother to come up with one, so Mal did it for me. They also have an ambassador that represents the town of Sidhaven on New Mellingham's council. The city itself has a mayor-council government. The mayor, of course, is the head, and then there's a council of educated elders that help run it. They have a local guard, and they have local courts, because you need to have an area with you need to have some sort of law enforcement to keep things in line. This town has a lot of crafting apprenticeships for their education. They don't have a school. Everybody learns hands-on because pretty much everyone here, at least of the males, has to do actual work. They're a mining community as well as other resource extraction. So a lot of the kids who know that they're going to go into the mines to work will take mine safety training. And others will just learn about fishing, mending nets, or they're going to learn about harvesting peat. The people of Sidhaven speak the common tongue, which is called Ladis, and they have a regional language called Din. It's more of a dialect than it is a full language. Because it's a wetlands area, and they do have a very humid climate, and they're also along the coast, so it's warmer here, and they have heavy rainfalls. They have a river that runs through it, so they have water wheels that power grist mills, and they have ore crushers since they're a mining community. And iron is the number one extraction from the mines, and they have ore crushers that are powered by those water wheels. They do have some natural defenses. They have some bordering mountains, and of course the swamp is a deterrent for people who aren't used to traveling through it. And then of course on their eastern side they have the ocean. The ocean also provides them fishing opportunities, so that's another thing that they specialize in trade. The iron mines that are at the edge of the swamps is one of the major commodities, not just for trade, but for smithing. So there's obviously some smiths that are in the shopping and industry district over on the right that you can see on the map. And they've got the peatlands in the north that are providing a fuel source. Obviously, again, we have the fishermen. They do have coin that they use, but they also have a barter system. In this type of setting, barter is a big one because everybody has some kind of good that can be traded for something else. The people here aren't going to have a big agricultural system. They're going to grow some vegetables at home maybe, but they're not going to be able to have huge fields of wheat where they can harvest things to make, so they're going to have to trade for that. So they've got their iron and they have their fish that they can trade to get things that they obviously can't get here. Traders can come in and set up makeshift stalls along the road, or they can maybe establish something with one of the residents. Just rent out their bottom floor of their home for a little bit to open up shop, and then give the owner proceeds of their sales. That way they have a system where everybody benefits. There's no major temple here. There's going to be a small building that would be considered a church. It's not going to be a grand cathedral, but they do have a local physician and a midwife that can take care of the health of the people in the town. And with a mine, there's probably going to be some injuries that they're going to have to deal with and help improve. Transportation, we've got horse-drawn carriages, carts, wagons. There's no cars in this world, but we've got ships along the docks as well. There's also going to be some little fishing boats as well. And then the culture, which is a lot of times the most fun. They probably have a Founders Day. Whoever established the town will be held in honor, and chances are there'll be a lot of drinking to their name. And then, because there is a swamp surrounding the town, they're going to have a festival called Will o' the Wisp. So maybe it's got some children's games where they can play Foxfire Tag, and someone has a candle and that person is it, and then the rest of the kids chase them, and whoever's the closest when the candle's blown out wins. So they can play all these different games that are influenced by their surroundings. social classes and gender roles. We talked about having social issues in your world and how that can completely change the flow of a story. Racism is unfortunately something that you have to deal with just about everywhere. Sexism is also dealt with, and this place is no different. The women are expected to stay in the town. They're not brought into the mines to work. They don't work the docks. There's a chance that they might fish some, but it would probably be more so as a leisurely activity. They're expected to stay in the town and raise the children and tend a small garden maybe in the backyard. Because this is a port town, obviously they have a lot of fish, and that's their main meat dish. It's not the kind of area that they would probably have a lot of cattle or pork, so they would more so rely on the fish as the protein in their meals, and then they would have some vegetable gardens, and they would obviously trade for some. The people are dressed for work. They wear practical clothes that are designed for protection and mobility, not to impress anyone, because this is a rural town. It's not some big city that they're trying to impress anyone except maybe the mayor. Music is a huge part, so obviously they're going to have a little bit of music, probably some wooden flutes and stringed instruments, and that's going to be a big part of their entertainment. Kids will play games. They will have probably a tavern where they can go at the end of the workday, and they just spend time with their family because it's a very close-knit family community. So we have our town completely done after 4 long sessions, and at the very beginning I told you not to info dump. I told you not to just beat people over the head with lore. But now I'm telling you that you should establish it. I'm still not telling you to have 3 chapters in your book that talks about nothing but the culture of your world. I'm not telling you to interrupt your D&D campaign to have a lecture on sexism in the world that your game exists in. These are just things that you leave little breadcrumbs about. These are the topics that you're going to discuss that are going to come up on their own. So when I tell you not to go over the top with lore, I think you should make it. I think you need to work it with it, and you need to love the lore of your world. You need to really establish it. It needs to be a firm foundation that you can build your story on. You don't just make it with the intentions of pushing it aside, and you don't make it with the intentions of boring your readers. The idea is to make it realistic and to make your world last, and to give yourself room to grow and to expand. Before I do all my little thanks, because we're at the end, I'm sure some people are like, finally! I'll answer any questions that anyone has. And there's been a lot of new people in the chat. I will also post the playlist where all of these previous episodes are hosted as well, because I record each one, and this one will be up as well. I have a couple of questions that people had given me before I started this, but because there's a lot of people in the chat, if anyone has any questions, I am looking at it now and can answer those. Okay, one of the questions that I had before I started, that someone had asked me was, when I write, do I listen to music? Yes. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with world building specifically, but yes, I listen to music. I typically don't listen to anything with lyrics because they're distracting. It has to really fit the scene. I usually make a playlist before I sit down to write and make sure that it fits the scenes that I plan to write that day. I do a lot of my writing at work because I have the most time there. So I don't get to listen to music at work, unfortunately, but during events like National Novel Writing Month and the Camp NaNoWriMo, I typically will listen to music that I have already established. Mal asks, what have I learned from doing a series on Twitch? I've learned a lot about Twitch. I did Twitch some gaming sessions. I streamed 3 separate times. And it's a challenge. I think it's a really great platform, and you meet a lot of interesting people. It's a lot better than working with a workshop in person, because I have done this in person before, and as you can probably tell, I start talking fast and I get flustered, and it's a lot harder to stay focused. So we could be talking about one subject and completely do 180 and talk about something completely different very quickly when I'm in person and I don't have an outline. So doing it on Twitch is really helpful in keeping focus, and I like having people be able to participate if they like. I've also learned that I have a lot of technical difficulties, and I am not tech savvy when it comes to this. I can tell you a lot about certain computer issues, but this is a completely different bear. I just put a link into the chat room for the people there. In theory, that should take you to the playlist that has the first 3 episodes. If someone can check that and let me know, that would be fantastic. And this one, as soon as it's done, then I will put it up too. It takes a little bit of time to import it or export it to YouTube. But hopefully that link will work for everybody. Excellent. Thank you, Mal, for testing that for me. So, just wrapping this up, I just wanted to take time to thank RPHQ Roleplay Headquarters for hosting and supporting this, and for encouraging it. There have been several people there who have supported me doing this and encouraged me to do it, and you all know who you are. Obviously, Mal in the chat has been one of the most supportive people in doing this. So everyone who came to this stream, thank you. I really appreciate your presence being here, letting me know how things are going, and giving me some feedback. I also want to thank my writing group. I know some of them have been going back and listening to these after they've already been published. If it weren't for my writing group, I wouldn't be doing any of this. I wouldn't be writing, I wouldn't be published, I wouldn't be doing anything like this whatsoever. I would probably be sitting here playing Heroes of the Storm or Overwatch and not accomplishing anything with my life. So they get a whole lot of thanks, If you're not a member of a writing group in person, I highly recommend it. I am a really shy person in public spaces and was terrified to join them, but now that I'm a part of them, I wouldn't have it any other way. And also thanks to my IT guy, aka my husband, because we had technical difficulties the first 3 sessions, and if it weren't for him, then this probably wouldn't have worked out so great. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate you for attending, for listening after. I appreciate everybody who has supported this and asked questions. Again, I am always open to questions here on email, through Twitter, through the RPHQ community, Discord if you can track me down there. My name pretty much everywhere is Celestia. It's at Celestia on Twitter, Celestia at Gmail. If you type in Celestia, it used to be me, but now it's other people have stolen my name. But pretty much it's going to be that anywhere you look for me. Thanks everybody again for coming and for your support, and I look forward to maybe doing this again later. Have a great evening.